Did you know that in the late 1800s in the South, most blacks were Republican? They held office in one of the biggest cities in North Carolina. When did it all end? Well, let me tell you. Towards the end of the 19th century, Wilmington was a majority black, racially integrated, prosperous city, and the largest city in North Carolina. And in the 1890s, Wilmington, North Carolina was a city that was almost exclusively run by black Republican men and women. These black people covered almost every position in government and in the city, and even prominent office up to the state level.
Wilmington was really an outlier. It was unusual. It was unique among southern cities. And first of all, it had a majority black population. It was 56% black. I think New Orleans was something like 27%, Louisville was 17%. But more importantly, it had a multiracial government, which was very unusual at the time. You had black men in positions of power. You had 3 of the 10 city aldermen were black. 10 of the 26 policemen were black. You had black magistrates. The superintendent of streets was black. The county treasurer was black. So there was this real sort of meeting of the white Republicans and black Republicans sharing power in a mid-sized southern town, biggest city in North Carolina at the time, an important commercial port. And this just drove the white supremacists crazy. The other thing that was unusual about Wilmington was that residentially it was very mixed. There was still segregation in some neighborhoods, but there were a lot of neighborhoods where whites and blacks lived next to each other, particularly the working class.
The Republican Party would also go on to merge with poor white cotton farmers, fed up with the capitalism of big banks, called the Populist Party, forming an interracial coalition with a platform of self-governance, free public education, and equal voting rights for black men, called the Fusion. The Democratic Party in Wilmington, made of mainly white conservative men, were angered and frustrated that black men and women were allowed more power and voting rights after Reconstruction that allowed the majority to rule and run Wilmington, and that their own race was teaming up with blacks to further their mission. In late 1897, 9 prominent white Wilmington men were unhappy with what they called the Negro Rule. The Secret 9 teamed up with the Democratic State Party chairman, Furnifold Simmons, and started to create smear campaigns against blacks in the Republican Party of Wilmington. The campaign started in a local paper called The Caucasian. From there, it spread to many different papers in the form of political cartoons. After this, white Democrats launched a coup d'etat of over 2,000 white men armed to the teeth, including the Gatling gun, to overthrow the legitimately elected local fusionist government. Alfred Waddell, who led the militias, was also responsible for the uprising of these men against the black population of the city. Teaming up with Simmons, the former congressman formed speeches against blacks, started meeting to create white supremacist clubs, which included the White League and the Red Shirts, and eventually expelled opposition black and white political leaders from the city and destroyed the property and businesses of black citizens that were built up since the Civil War.
They were called Red Shirts. And in effect, it was the Klan. You had an extremely well-armed white populace. At the same time, they refused to sell weapons or ammunition to blacks. So there was no way for the blacks to defend themselves. And in addition, they had this red shirt militia, and their job was to ride out through the Cape Fear countryside at night, barge into blacks' homes, pull the men out, whip them, beat them, intimidate them, and say, if you dare to register to vote, we're going to come back and kill you. In addition to the private militia, they had two state militias. There was the Wilmington Light Infantry and the City Naval Reserves, and these were basically the National Guard of the day. They were supposed to report to the Republican governor in Raleigh, but in fact, they reported to the leaders of the white supremacy movement. The colonel was a member of one of the secret committees of white supremacists who were planning the insurrection. Every member of both these militias were white supremacists. And this is Colonel Alfred Moore Waddell. He was a former Confederate officer. He was a former congressman. And he was the man who led the red shirts, who would lead them the next day on the right. And this was the night before the election.
One of those buildings was that of the Daily Record, ran by black editor Alexander Manley.
In August of 1898, he responded to a speech by a woman named Mrs. Felton in Georgia, who was the wife of a prominent politician. She gave a stirring speech in Georgia about lynching and about alleged rapes of white women by black men. And in the speech, she said, the solution to these rapes is the lynch rope. I say lynch 1,000 times a week if necessary. Alex Manley read this the very next day. He wrote a response. And in his editorial, it was an incredibly brave thing for a black man to do at that time with the white supremacy movement in full swing. He wrote that supposed rapes by black men of white women were in many cases, the men were actually the consensual lovers of the white women, and that black men were attracted to white women, and whites were hypocrites because white men would rape black women with impunity. It happened all the time in Wilmington and elsewhere, and he had the courage to point this out. As you can imagine, this did not go over well, and in fact, this was reprinted across the South, and people were enraged. The red shirts the next day wanted to lynch Alex Manley, and he was warned about the lynch. Well, he knew that the lynch party was coming from him, and he got out of town just in time. He fled and never went back.
Once he was forced to leave town, the militia torched the newspapers.
This is where it once stood.
Once the white leadership destroyed Alex Manley's printing press, they destroyed one way in which the African American community in Wilmington could organize itself and keep itself informed.
At City Hall, the mayor and board of aldermen were forced out.
There's 200 armed men in City Hall at the time. They didn't do it of their own free will. And as they resigned, a new member selected by the Democratic Party was voted into office.
African Americans gathered weapons to defend themselves as whites patrolled the streets searching for blacks to carry out Waddell's claim to choke the Cape Fear River with Negro carcasses. At around 11 a.m., near the intersection of 4th and Harnett Streets, in the mostly black community of Brooklyn, a gun battle broke out.
Now, an estimated 60 to more than 300 people were killed. After this event, many of the white Democrats took power of the city and elected themselves into the high positions, including Alfred Waddell, who became mayor. This coincided with the broader efforts of disenfranchisement at the state level. Whereas North Carolina had 125,000 registered black voters in 1896, it had 6,000 by 1902. By 1910, Charlotte overtook Wilmington as the state's largest city. The Wilmington insurrection also led to other insurrections throughout the United States. One in Illinois, and the other one in a city that was known as Phoenix, South Carolina. Phoenix, South Carolina no longer exists because of the insurrection that happened in North Carolina and Wilmington. During the insurrection in Phoenix, South Carolina, They say that 8 men were killed, while the others were ran out of town. Back in Wilmington, North Carolina, the buildings that held the name and honor of the lead perpetrators of white supremacy are now being changed. The names of those buildings are now being changed.
Big changes in the works to UNC Chapel Hill campus.
This comes after the Board of Trustees voted to change the name of several buildings named after historical figures with controversial past. CBS 17's Holden Kowicki joining us live now in Chapel Hill with more on how the university plans to move forward. Holden.
Well, Randy, after a series of 11-2 votes, crews here at UNC got to work removing signage from outside of several buildings. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the campus, those buildings are named after Julian Carr, Charles Aycock, Josephus Daniels, and Thomas Ruffin Sr. All 4 were known to have had ties to white supremacy and other harmful acts. So the Board of Trustees decided they should no longer honor them at UNC, and the students we spoke with agree.
I don't want to go to a school that associates with any idea of white supremacy, and I want to be with a place that celebrates diversity and inclusion of others.
So, if you are planning on making a journey to North Carolina, and if you decide to go to Wilmington, North Carolina, please remember the dark history that was there. If you would like more videos like this, please make sure to share this video with your friends and family. Also, make sure that you follow my Facebook page so you can get more videos like this. I'm starting up a YouTube channel, and I would like you guys to come by and subscribe. Some of the same videos that I'll be putting on Facebook, I'll also be putting on YouTube as well. And I also have a little more exclusive content on YouTube than I would on Facebook. So if you would please come by and lend me your subscription, I'll most definitely appreciate it. Until next time, y'all.